This is the You Can Learn Chinese podcast. For everyone who's trying to learn Chinese or reaching for the next level, you came to the right place. I am your host, Jared Turner, and due to inflation, you may now eat food that has been on the floor for up to 8.5 seconds. My co-host is John Pasden, who's out for this episode, but he told me that if he's reading their lips correctly, his neighbors are arguing about some creepy guy next door. Let's get to it.
So I'm Cleopatra Wise. My Chinese name is Hua Mulan, and I have been a corporate social responsibility and social impact professional for over a decade. I started my career in China, and I've been living in the New York City area for the past 4 to 5 years. I've been learning Chinese for a long time. I'm always a lifelong learner, and I'm really glad to be on the podcast.
All right, Cleopatra, why did you start learning Chinese?
This is a great question, and it's actually a very interesting story. So I went to university for my bachelor's at the University of Southern California, and at the time, I had no desire to learn any foreign language at all. But because I took a global leadership class, as a part of that class, we had to go to Shanghai during the second semester. I did not know that when I signed up for the class. And so during the class, our teacher was like, okay, everyone, we're going to go to China. Does everyone have their visa, their passport, blah, blah, blah. And I was like, visa, passport, what? I'm going to China? And everybody's like, yeah, we're going to China during spring break. And so I got everything together, but I still really didn't want to go. I was like, I can't afford to go. I don't want to go. I had only ever been to one other country before that. And so they convinced me. They said, you have to go. Are you going to fail this class? Which is pretty much a strong way to convince someone. And they gave me money to go to
so
China.
They helped fund you, right?
Yeah, they helped fund me to go. And it was the most transformative experience of my life. I would say there's probably been 3 transformative experiences of my life, and that is one of them. And I fell in love with Shanghai during that time.
I got to hear a little bit on the story. What was your perception of China at that point?
No perception. I was just very, very American-minded. So just to give context, I am from Florida, so like North Florida, where it's very conservative, very rural, and I had lived all over Florida. But going to college was a very different experience for me because California is a completely different cultural shift and mindset from Florida. And I had never known many Asian people at all. My entire life. I had only ever been to Dominican Republic, probably for like for a couple months when I was a kid. And I just didn't have any desire to go anywhere. I'm like, I'm American. I speak English. So why do I care about China or any other place? And so I really didn't want to go just from that perspective. But because I had to go, I was like forced to go on this trip. I said, well, if I'm going, I might as well make the most of it. And all of my classmates and the experience itself was so amazing. And because that time, it was right before the Olympics. So this was like 2008. This is 2008.
I was there right before the Olympics. We might have been around.
Nice.
Yeah, on
so
the same
maybe
type
around
of
the same time.
spring break trip. Anyway, go on.
Amazing time. The energy of Shanghai was so vibrant. We visited a couple of companies. We visited Fudan University. We met a lot of local people. And there's something about Shanghai in particular, even though I never lived in Shanghai, but there's something about Shanghai that's so international, that's so globally focused, and the energy in Shanghai and the speed of Shanghai was nothing I had ever seen before, albeit I hadn't traveled much by then, but still, I had never seen anything like it. And I left that experience thinking, China is the future, and I need to be involved with China somehow, some way. And so from there, I decided, this was the spring semester of my freshman year. So I decided I'm going to take Chinese as like a language.
I'm curious to know about this experience in Shanghai. I've experienced some like, wow, this place is amazing, right? But was there any specific experience or some sort of instance what really was like, wow, like something that really drove something home to you?
I don't think it was one particular thing. It was just the entire trip itself. So going to Shanghai, kind of going to the Bund, going to Fudan University, seeing businesses, meeting people. I'm a very social person. And so just meeting people and talking with people, it gave me this sense that like there's something special about China and there's something special about Shanghai. And it just so happened that the demographics of the people on my trip, there was about 60% Asian American, most of which were Chinese. And then there were, white American students. And then for me, I'm Black. And so the experience was very different from me vis-a-vis them, but also just being able to kind of see China from a Chinese American point of view, and like people showing me how to use the chopsticks and showing me different things I could eat and kind of showing me around really helped me kind of ground my experience of the trip. And I thought coming back to America that there is something very special about Shanghai, something special about China, and somehow I should reframe my thinking as a global citizen. I never seen myself as someone who was global or who cared about things that were happening in the world. I'd always seen myself as purely American, and I didn't care about anything else that was going on. And that trip very much shifted that mindset. And so I knew I needed to learn Chinese when I came back.
Wow, that's neat. Well, I want to know, what led this into actually learning Chinese? I mean, I've met people and I know people, even still living in China, who are fascinated with China and think, hey, yeah, it's, the future's here or something. But not everyone goes on to learn Chinese. So what happened with you?
I would say part of it is a part of my personality. I'm someone who goes on interest rabbit holes, so to speak. So if I like something, then I'll start really studying about it. And it doesn't have to be for a professional reason. It could just, this is my personal interest. So therefore, I'm going to know so much about this one topic. And I would say the other part was delusion. I was very young. I didn't know that Chinese was hard. I didn't know that most people who signed up for my Chinese 1 class would be on their like 3rd or 4th language already. And I would be the only person in the class who was learning a first foreign language. I didn't know any of that. I went in like, oh, this is like Spanish or something. Like I'll just learn this language and it won't be difficult. I didn't know that it would be difficult. But I think because of the challenge of learning Chinese itself, I was very much motivated because I wasn't going to spend my time learning a language and then not be able to speak it. Absolutely not. So I had to spend much more time than everyone else in my class to do even half as good. But I love talking. I love socializing with people. And so because of that, I was able to actually learn Chinese and gain some level of proficiency in Chinese.
Well, you say in retrospect now, you look back and oh yeah, Chinese is hard. But did you realize that at the beginning, or was it just like, oh, this is learning a language and you're just going through it?
I realized it when I actually took the first class is when I realized it. I didn't, I told you before, I did not have any preconceived notions of Chinese or China. So I didn't really know much about China other than like some martial arts things that I knew from when I was a kid, watching like Bruce Lee or Jet Li, that sort of thing. But I didn't know anything about Chinese language or that it would be difficult. Somehow those conversations were lost on me. And so when I came into my Chinese 1 class at USC, most of the class were either Asian Americans, Chinese Americans who could speak but not properly and could not write, or people who were interested in Chinese but already knew 2 or 3 other languages. So this wasn't their first rodeo in learning a language. And I was the only person in the class who did not know any other languages. And also, I am tone deaf, which if you know anything about Chinese, Chinese has 4 tones, and I'm musically not inclined, and everyone else in my class seemed to be very musically inclined. So the first class we were talking about tones, and she just kept going, he just kept going, like doing the tones. And I was like, I don't hear any difference, but everyone else seems to know the difference. Like they got it. I was like, how do they have this? That's why I knew, oh, this was going to be challenging, but I couldn't drop the class because I'd already changed my major. In my major, you had to, like for international relations in USC, you have to take a foreign language or you have to place out of a foreign language. So I didn't know any foreign language to place out of. I didn't want to drop Chinese. I really didn't want to take Spanish because I had already tried to take Spanish in high school and it was like a big fail. So I said, you know what? I'm just going to stick with this. And I met a lot of people who really helped me along the way. Shout out to one of my friends, Angela. She's amazing. She helped me with my tones. She's the reason why
Angela.
I got my tones down and everything, and just really focusing on the fundamentals and then just speaking all the time is what really helped me.
We said speaking all the time, but I know that's one of the challenges that many people have in learning a language. Most people who are learning Chinese are not in China. And so how did you have opportunities or find opportunities to speak Chinese in that university setting?
So for me, because I was in Los Angeles has a very high population of Chinese people or Chinese speaking people. And so being able to just interact in the city, interact with people who are international students at my university who came from China or Taiwan or just were from Chinese American heritage was the way that I was able to speak often. And then I signed up for this volunteer program. We used to go to a impoverished school in Chinatown and help kids with their homework and tutor them. And a lot of those kids spoke Chinese as well. And so just being able to engage in those different types of activities is what helped me like actually be able to speak outside of the classroom, because I learned really quickly that classroom time wasn't going to be enough for me. I'm not good. I'm not like inherently good with languages. Although I will say, once I started learning Chinese and got further in Chinese, it's easier to learn other things. So like, for example, I learned West African Creole, which is like a pidgin
Mm,
English, so to speak, mixed with a little bit of French and a little bit of Arabic. And then right now I'm learning classical Arabic to memorize the Quran because I'm Black and
wow.
I'm Muslim. So, and I've been
Wow.
memorizing. And so like all of that is much easier because I have language learning skills and I know another language. But off top, when you're first learning your first language, it isn't an easy feat unless you're just like naturally good. But you can 100% learn a language even if you're not naturally inclined to do so.
I'm also interested to know, like, a little bit. I know you spent many years living in China, and maybe you could talk a little bit about, hey, why did you actually decide, or what actually took you over there to China, and what was that like being on the ground, like being back in China, I guess, after that one first experience in speaking and trying to use the language.
My second experience going to China was during my study abroad. So I did a summer intensive with USC, and then I spent the whole year at Peking University doing an exchange program where we were doing a Chinese intensive as well. And then I went back to USC for my senior year, graduated, and moved back to China. So I would say my first kind of experience was actually getting from the airport in Beijing to Beijing Normal University, which for anyone who knows where that is, it's very far from each
Yeah, well,
other.
that airport is just way outside of town.
It's way outside of
Were
town.
you
Yeah,
by
it's very
yourself?
far. I was by myself because
Oh, okay.
for
Wow. All right.
whatever reason, I didn't come with the rest of my group. I don't know why that is still, but I didn't come with the rest of my group. And so I had to take a taxi. So if anyone knows Beijing accent, so even though all of my Chinese teachers to that point had Beijing accents, a Beijing accent that is very professional and standardized, it's very different than like a local Beijing taxi driver accent. They speak very fast and they have this like drawl to their words. Yeah,
Yeah,
like
yeah,
it's
and
like
or
it's very
they sound like a bunch of pirates over there. Arr! Yeah, it sounds like,
Yeah.
yeah.
So it's just very, very fascinating. And so I had a female taxi driver, which almost never happens. And I was like, oh, I'm going here. And, I use my Chinese and I'm like, oh, I'm going here. And I showed her the paper and she said something to me. I don't know what that lady said. I was like, sure. Okay. So
Sway,
again,
right?
yeah, I'm like, sure. And then I get into the taxi as she's just driving for what seemed like forever. I'm like, am I going to die in China? Because I don't know where this is. And then, so just for more context, the airport is in the middle of nowhere, but also
Mhm.
Beijing Capital University is also kind of in the middle of nowhere. So then you're just like going from and then into a bunch of traffic and then back to the middle of nowhere. So I was like, oh, I feel like I'm getting kidnapped. And I was so scared
Oh, no.
because I wasn't sure, but I made it there safely
Well, did
and
she
I
take you
was
directly
fine.
to the university or was
I
did the wrong
how
place
was I
first?
supposed to know? I
You
don't
don't know.
know.
You
And
got there.
remember, this is a long time ago, so we didn't have smartphones with the
Mhm.
Google apps and all of these things.
You mean Baidu Maps, right? Of course. That's of course what you meant.
Baidu Maps or any maps. There was none of that. This was a flip phone days. And I don't think at that point, does smartphones even exist? I don't think so.
Yeah,
No,
yeah,
no,
we
no.
did. No, they were there. They
They,
were there. Yeah.
2000 and, because this was 2009. So I hadn't seen a smartphone yet. I still hadn't seen them. They existed, but I hadn't seen
They
one.
were for the us hoity-toity rich people, which was not me, so
Yeah.
I didn't have one either.
So very different time. And you couldn't just call people because of the phone plans and all of this other stuff. So it's a very, very different time. And it was my first introduction into the Beijing accent and just like being in China, but very much amazing. And spending that time at doing the summer intensive was very much a good foundation for the rest of my year.
Wow, that's really neat. That's really neat. Now you went back, you graduated, then you came back to China. So maybe you could talk about that. Why did you actually decide, hey, I am going to pursue a job, career experience here in China? And then what kind of drove that?
Some was a push and some was a pull. So in the year that I spent in China, there was a lot of this is almost like a history lesson. That's how old I am now. So there was a financial crisis which happened about 2008, right? So that was
Yep.
2008. I went to China in 2009. I graduated 2010. So the economy was very bad. Like probably worse than what it is now, to be
Yeah.
honest. It was just not a great time. But because of what was happening with the financial crisis, there was like two types of students. There were like younger students in my class during my exchange program, but there was this whole group of like finance people in my class who had got laid off from Lehman Brothers when they went under and Goldman Sachs and all of these very prominent bankers. And they were just like, oh, I'm just here. I'm going to learn Chinese because China's the future. And, I got money and no work in America. So let me just be in China. Like they were all the age that I am now, like in their late 30s and early 40s. And so I had made friends with all of these people and I left, went back and I graduated, but they all stayed and they got really good jobs because China did not
Hmm.
get hit by the financial crisis at all, really. And they really needed people who were going to improve their financial markets and help with VC, PE, all of that sort of thing. So they all pretty much encouraged me to come. They was like, why stay in the US? Just come. Like you can stay with me, whatever, whatever. So my first job actually was in Taiwan in Kaohsiung. And then I
Hmm.
spent a year working for what is called like a bushiban. So a bushiban
Hmm.
is basically a tutoring service. And they also helped Taiwanese international students go to America or Europe for college. And so it's a very interesting experience. I did a lot of like admin and clerical work for them, as well as like community engagement programs. It was really fun. But I love Kaohsiung, but Kaohsiung's not a place to start your career. It's a place to end your career, but not to start. It's like too fun. Like you're just like beach and sun and let's just like eat at the night market every night. Like it's not a very busy place, especially not in comparison like to like a Taipei or Shanghai or Beijing. And so all my friends who were still in Beijing, they're like, come to Beijing. So I went to Beijing and I interviewed for Peking University and I got the job on the spot. They were like, we really need someone to help us with global
Mm.
programs and with accreditation. And we love you. Like, just work with us. And I credit that to why I speak Chinese at a very good level now, because all of my coworkers were Chinese and Peking University is like a very Chinese university with a lot of global programming. But the way that the kind of like family oriented atmosphere that people have there and just the way that you interact with your coworkers is a completely different atmosphere and culture than in the US. And so I still talk to almost all of my coworkers there. And when my boss comes to New York with her kid, who's like huge now, he's like in high school, I still go and see them. So I saw them last year, like we all hung out at the Met and it was really fun.
Really?
Yeah, yeah. So I still have really good connections back there. But that was like all of my 20s is working at Peking
Mhm.
University and really
Mhm.
understanding Beijing and being embedded into the culture there.
Well, that's really neat. I want to hear a little bit more about this experience, like working in Taiwan, in China. And you mentioned you're working in the Bushiban, right? The
Yeah.
tutoring center there in Taiwan versus Beijing University there, and how your Chinese really took off there. How much of your workday were you using Chinese? How much for like the actual work you're doing were you using Chinese? And what were some of those other influences that really kind of helped you accelerate and propel your Chinese during that time?
So in Taiwan, I would use Chinese for all of the parents. So the kids themselves, the students, were speaking in English because they all had very high English proficiency and they also wanted to be spoken to in English. But for the parents, they were like, no, some of them spoke English, some of them didn't, but mostly you're speaking in Chinese. And then at Peking University, all of the work that I was responsible for was in English, but the communications were in Chinese. So, like, for example, I ran a strategy committee for them. So basically, accreditation is when you do an overview of the entire business school and we're submitting reports so that they can be peer reviewed so they can get accredited by international business accreditation bodies. It's very
Mm,
prestigious, it's very important work. And so because it involves the entirety of the business school, you have to collect metrics and data around that.
mm,
And so I ran those committees and making sure that everyone knew what to collect and that we're measuring against all the strategic goals. It's a lot of planning involved with it. So, like, if I'm doing something, the report is in English and the communications to the accreditation body is in English. But if I need to set up a meeting, that's going to be in Chinese. Like, this is a meeting time. This is what we're doing, blah, blah, blah. We're doing the meetings themselves. Those are all in Chinese. And so, kind of like working in between the Chinese and English. I always tell people if you are a foreigner, especially if you work in China, most likely no one's going to hire you to do work in Chinese specifically because they could hire a Chinese person to do work in Chinese.
yeah.
Like your Chinese, maybe if you're like, I don't know, very, very good, then I guess perhaps your Chinese could be on the same level as someone with native proficiency, but probably not. Most likely it will not
Yeah.
be. However, you serve as kind of the liaison and thought leader between what's happening in the world and China and making sure that you're able to communicate effectively to your team and to your peers is really important. And that is going to be in Chinese, even if your work is still internationally focused, which all my work was internationally focused, but the communication, all of that is navigating Chinese culture and communicating in Chinese with your coworkers. So that's the distinction.
I think this is an interesting point to maybe explore a little bit. Based on your experience, maybe you could share some perspective on why you've seen different foreigners succeed at jobs in China and maybe some reasons why maybe they haven't.
I would say the first is your attitude, right? When I came to China, I knew China wasn't going to be like the US. So that is a mind shift in and of itself. You can't think, I'm going to operate in the same way as I would in the US. I'm going to expect that my job situation or the culture or the environment will accommodate me. And if you have that mindset, you will not succeed. It doesn't matter what job you're in. It doesn't even matter if you work for a foreign entity, like a US company or a Western company in China. You will be miserable in China because China does not move or operate in the same way as the US. I mean, it sounds like common sense, but it really is a very true thing going in. And then making sure that the work that you're doing, you're passionate about it. Like, I'm very passionate about globally focused work, about social impact work, about operations and systems management. Like, I like that sort of thing. I like solving problems. I like working with organizations that are mission focused, that have a good social impact mission. Those things are important to me. So then I love the work that we were doing and the things that I got to do while I was there. So I think that's also important. And then understanding the culture of where you are. So not every Chinese company is going to operate the same way. A startup is not like a university, is not like a school, isn't like a traditional SOE, isn't like a regular business. Shanghai is not like Beijing, right? So I think for me, Beijing is a good cultural fit. So people are very down to earth. They're very friendly. They're not into a lot of like social hierarchy in the same way as Shanghai. And Peking University is a very family-oriented type work environment. So I know all the kids of everyone that I used to work with. We used to
Mm,
go and visit after people had their kids, after they did their 30 days or yeza. Like, so the relationship there is quite close. Like, if you don't like that, you can't work at a Chinese university because they're almost always like that. It's very female friendly because a lot of women work in administrations at schools, and that's pretty much everywhere, even outside of China. So it's a very different type of cultural fit. And you have to find your cultural fit and you have to come in with a good mindset. Otherwise, China will not be a good place for you. And I think that's the difference between success and failure.
well, I appreciate that perspective. And I got to say, it's a little surprising to me hearing about, so you're talking about the culture of the university there, like, oh, everybody's kind of family, y'all know each other's kids. And in my experience in a lot of businesses in China, it's like coworkers have been working together for like, years, don't even know they have kids, or something like that.
Yeah. So different places, different cultural fit. And I would say education in general, like, and social impact work, nonprofit work, almost always are kind of like that. Like the US is not so much who never goes to someone's house after they had a kid. Absolutely not. But like they had a kid, you would know because it's a
Yeah, exactly.
different,
Yeah.
yeah, it's a different environment.
Oh, that's really interesting. That's really neat. Well, curious to know then, what kind of brought you back here to the States? And I know some of the things you're involved in with like the Asia Society, because we initially connected through the
Yeah,
NCLC,
yeah.
National Chinese Language Conference. Maybe you could talk about this and how Chinese all fit into here to bring you to some of these different places.
So for me, I always knew that I didn't want to stay in China post 30. And the reason I knew that is a couple of things. Because in China, having a life plan is kind of drilled into you. I was never a very traditional person before China. And I think living in China gives you a sense of what should you be doing for the rest of your life because everyone's asking you, are you married? Do you have kids? When are you getting married? When are you having kids? Like it's always constantly in your ear, the auntie down the street, the bodega lady, like that's just their culture. And
Yeah,
it's
yeah.
very commonplace to ask that. So it made me really reflect like for my future, do I want to stay? And I know
Mm,
lots of people who are thriving in China who've lived there pretty much all their lives. They're in their 60s and 70s. But China is not an immigration country. I am
hmm
American, and living there post a certain age becomes quite difficult
hmm
because your network and your community and everyone you know becomes China. And going back home becomes more and more difficult as you age. So I fully understood that probably around 25, 26. And so in 2018 is when I said, okay, I should leave. So that was like right, I think either was I 30 then? I can't even remember, but it was probably right around the age where I was about to be 30. And so I actually saw the posting at the Age Society. I said, oh, this is a really good fit for me because it is trying to work, it's purpose driven. It's a lot of system operations, a lot of communication with different schools. So it has all those kind of like fixing problems, communicating, relationship building, fostering community. And those are things that are important to me. And so I had met with my former boss, Jeff Wong. He actually was coming to China. He had to go to China back and forth a lot for the role. And so he was like, oh, I'll just meet you when I'm in Beijing. I said, okay, cool. So I met him. I got to meet the team. And so I knew it was a good fit. They knew it was a good fit. And so that's how I ended up coming to the Age Society. So it was very interesting. I literally moved in January and I started working either a week later or 2 weeks later.
Oh,
And
wow.
yeah, so I mean, from China, I was like 7, 8 years of living in Beijing and then moving right away. I didn't even have apartment yet. I was staying with my friend
Yeah.
and I was like still looking for an apartment. It was a very interesting transitional year in my life because even though I had been going to the US every single year, seeing my family, seeing friends, I had no idea what was going on in the US. I thought I did,
hmm
I had no
Yeah.
idea. I was completely out of the loop, and somehow I had become not cool anymore. I didn't know any pop culture, I didn't know any references, I didn't know anything. So it was just a really weird year. And that was the end of the Trump administration, which was wild. And it was on the
hmm
edge of COVID. So that's when I came back. Very weird time to
Yeah.
come back. Yeah.
It's when I moved back to the States as well. And there's a concept of reverse culture shock. And it sounds to me that
Yes.
that's a little bit of what you experienced.
Yeah. So I would say for me, it was definitely a reverse culture shock. One, because the way I left and how I came back, it's not that I was a completely different person, but my mindset was completely shifted.
Hmm.
And then from a religious standpoint, I had converted to Islam in China. And
Hmm.
so I was now a hijabi wearing Muslim Black woman in New York City, which is a completely different experience than living in California or living in Florida or just being a Black American. And so that was a complete culture shock because the way people interact with me is very different, actually.
Really?
Yeah, it's completely different. Well, for one, I have been told all my life that I look very African. Obviously, I am African to an extent. Like I'm
Yeah.
African American, so I'm African, but I'm not African by culture or nationality or
Hmm.
anything like that. But because I wear hijab now, I look even more African. So now I
Oh,
get this
okay. All
like
right.
very interesting foreign experience. So people automatically assume I'm a foreigner almost everywhere, even in
Uh,
New York, maybe even especially
really?
in New York. So I get stopped and asked for directions all the time by foreigners. And then as soon as I open my mouth, they're like, wait, where are you from? I'm like, oh, I'm from Florida. And they're just like, your parents? I'm like, no, we're
You look
all
not
from Florida.
Florida.
Yeah. And so it's just a very interesting experience. Or like, I'll be talking to someone, they're like, your English is like very good. I'm like, I would hope so. I'm American. They're just like, but you look
Yeah.
so
That better
exotic. And I'm
be.
like, I'm like, no, I'm not exotic. I'm just a Black American. And it's just a very interesting experience the last few years, like encountering that and encountering how people treat me and the differences there.
Mm.
And I used to always hear my Asian American friends say, I really hate when people ask me, where are you from? And I never quite understood that until now I get, where are you from? No, like, really, where are you from? But what
Like,
about your parents? And
really? Yeah.
they're not sure what to ask me because obviously I'm Black. So they don't know what to ask. But they're just like, but like your parents, they're from, I'm like, no, I'm an African American convert. Like, and they're just like, oh, yeah, sure.
Yeah.
It's fascinating.
You should just say like Western Africa, probably. I don't know.
I mean, I did a 23andMe. It was interesting. My family is basically a mutt. We're from everywhere and nowhere at the same time. So it's like,
We're the great melting pot, right?
yeah, it was a great melting pot. So all of West Africa for the most part, some East Africa, and a lot of the UK
Really?
and Ireland. That's like 20%. And then like a complete mix
Wow.
of West Africa, with the highest percentage of West Africa being Nigerian. But by highest, I mean like 30%. So not even that high. Like it's just a lot. Like everything's like a
Yeah, I
little bit of
see.
this, a little bit of that, a little bit of this. But I mean, it didn't look like anything I didn't
I need to do that.
expect. So yeah, you should do it.
My whole mom's side's Hispanic. My whole dad's side is just, white European and probably some Native American we have rumored in there,
Yeah.
and who knows, right? And I speak Chinese. So there we go.
No, it's very, very cool to kind of see. And then they also give you a breakdown of like where you got what lineage. I don't know how accurate it is because obviously I'm not a
Hmm.
scientist. And so it tells you like which generations came from where. And so for my DNA, it's like we migrated from East Africa going to West Africa. And then in the US is where you got the European DNA. And it's just fascinating to see that. But I mean, I really didn't need a test to the East Africa part. I needed a test to tell me, but my last name is British. So I kind of
Yeah, well,
knew
there you
there
go.
must be British DNA there. And then I knew like I look properly West African. I get Nigerian a lot. So I assume I must have some Nigerian in me. And I was definitely right about that. So yeah, it was very fascinating to do.
Well, Cleopatra, I also want to hear a little bit about your experience about being a Black woman in China. And I know there's a lot of different stories that can happen a little bit different depending on where you are in your whole situation. But maybe you could share a little bit about that experience.
I would say there's almost like three phases of experiences. So there's the Black experience. So being Black in China and obviously everyone knows you're a foreigner, and people don't, or at that time when I first came, people hadn't had much experiences with Black people. So like their entirety of understanding of Black people came from the media or you.
And mind you, this is in Beijing area, right? That's where you're at.
This is in Beijing. So this was when I first came, 2008, that was the Olympics. So then people just assumed I was in the Olympics, which kind of went pretty well for me, actually, because I got a lot of free stuff. But I'm like, I'm not in the Olympics, I promise you. And they're like, oh no, like you're in the Olympics. I can tell you're in the.
You must be an athlete. And you're like, okay, yes, I am. Right.
I'm 5'5". I really can't play anything.
you say I'm a gymnast, right? Or a power lifter, right?
Gymnasts are short. So like, it was very fascinating to have that experience. And then just meeting people who are quite elderly, because Beijing gets a lot of tourists, just like how Washington, D.C. does, or like New York City. And so I meet people and I love talking to people. And I remember one time I was in Tiananmen Square. There was this elderly lady. She came up to me. I could tell she used all her confidence to say picture.
She touched your hair, did she?
No.
Oh, okay.
She was like, picture in English. And I was like, oh, do you want to take a picture of me in Chinese? And she was like, yes. And she's like, oh, you speak Chinese? I'm like, yeah. So I took the picture with her. And then I asked her, I was like, have you ever seen a Black person before? And she was like, no. I mean, this lady looked like at least in her late 70s, early 80s. Uh-huh. She was very elderly. And I thought to myself, wow, I'm her first ever experience of seeing a Black person ever in her whole life. It was like wild to me. And you get those experiences a lot. It's strange to be like an ambassador for your whole race, but you kind of are. Like, people start to think, well, I like Cleo and she's Black. So then, of course, I like all Black people. I'm like, I don't know if that's the takeaway, but I mean, if it works, it works. So that's kind of like the first level of experience. I would say the second level of experience is that you are also thrown in with all these other foreigners, and most of the other foreigners in China are African. And I had never met that many African people before, or people across the Black diaspora. So Black people from Canada, or Black people from South America, or Black people from Europe. And you just start to get this identity of being like a Pan-African, or just having a Black diasporic identity, which I never had before. And I never knew much about Black people outside of an American context. And it was just like, I would say this is probably like the second transformative experience for me, because I wouldn't have gotten that outside of China. And I was able to go visit a couple countries in West Africa because of that experience and meeting Africans in China. And I met a lot of African Americans who also had similar experiences where they came to China. They had never thought about going to any African country. They met Africans in China and they were like, oh, I need to go. And then they ended up going to visit different countries like Kenya or Ghana or Nigeria. And because of that experience, they formed a greater connection with the continent that they wouldn't have had. And that to me is crazy, because China is the last place that you would think that would happen. But it is a place where that happens. So I would say that's the second experience.
I appreciate that. When I first came to China, anyone Black, I was just thinking, oh yeah, you must be an American guy. And then I, hey, what's up, man? Or hey, bro. And then they're just like, what? And then find out, wait, no, these guys are not my, Black African American guys. And I ended up having a really good friend from Ghana. And you're right. I think it's just a wonderful way to widen your horizons, right?
Yeah, and just get out of like an American context of your thinking. Because when you meet people, like I met people from everywhere. Like people ask me, what do you know about Chinese culture? Or how did you form Chinese culture? And I always say, although I did get a chance to travel in other places in China, because I lived in Beijing and Beijing was home, I know a lot about Beijing culture and people from Beijing and Dongbei. But I cannot say that I really know a whole host of things about other places in China. And the Chinese culture that I know is very predominantly Dongbei and Beijing. But the culture that I got from other people from around the world and understanding how people think and their viewpoints of America, or their viewpoints of certain issues that I would have been like, yes, this is exactly the way you're supposed to think about this. And people will say, no, actually, in our country, we believe X, Y, and Z. And you're just like, wait, what? And so like broadening your horizons and looking at different news and vantage points is something that I take for granted now, but that all happened from meeting people all over the world in
Mm.
China and getting that cultural context and different viewpoints. And so I would say that as a bucket was like a second transformative experience.
Mm.
And then the third is I converted to Islam in 2017. So it's like a year before I
Mm.
left. And I
Hmm.
started wearing hijab maybe about a year before. It took me a while to convert. It's like a whole thing. But
Hmm.
wearing hijab in China was an interesting experience because people view you as a foreigner and there aren't much understanding about Muslim people outside of, oh, we have
Hmm.
like two Muslim minorities. And so one day I just showed up to work with hijab and they're like, oh, you have hijab and you're praying now. Like, we don't know what this is, but okay. And we'll just take you to get some bigger food. And it was just like a very easy transition. And it's like outside of a lot of the context around like what people think about Muslims
Hmm.
and all this other influence, even from a Muslim community, because there wasn't much Muslim community in Beijing.
Hmm.
Like there is, but there are Muslim people in Beijing, but there's not an actual community that's like thriving and you could go to the mosque and all of these things, right?
Really? We have a mosque in Shanghai, but there's no mosques in Beijing?
There are mosques in Beijing, but I never went to a mosque in Beijing. It's very weird to know whether or not you could actually go. I never try to figure it out because I know when I was
Oh,
a
okay.
Christian, you
Hmm.
can go to church in China, but you have to go to specific types of churches that can
Yeah.
take foreigners. It was like a whole thing. And from that
Yep.
experience, I figured mosque would be similar and I just didn't want to deal with that. Like I just
I
figured it
see.
would be kind of weird. So if people want to pray, they could go to different embassies, like the Oman embassy or Jordan embassy for like special holidays. But there are way more Muslim men in China than there are women. And so for mosque, usually there's a separation between men and women for the prayer space. So if they haven't accommodated for that, it's a little weird to go. So for me, because I had this experience wearing hijab, or my first journey into hijab is in China, it made it a lot easier than what I think it would have been if I was in America. And I'm really
Really?
grateful for that. Yes,
That's really neat.
because in the US, wearing hijab, people have all these assumptions about you other than just you're Muslim. Whereas in China,
Mm.
they're just like, oh, you're Muslim and you're a foreigner. And so you're Muslim because you're a foreigner. And their thinking doesn't really go past that. Whereas in America, there's lots of thoughts about it. And so you're like,
Wow.
have to deal with that. And then also there's like proper way to wear hijab and having some of those conversations being told to you is like annoying and you don't want to hear this when you first start wearing hijab. And so being separated from all of that was a really good space for me to go on my own journey, separated from all the conversations around it. And that was quite nice.
Wow, that's fascinating. That's fascinating to hear. And you have a varied experience for sure, and
Yes.
certainly everyone's experience is unique. No one person's experience can be fully recreated, with someone else. It sounds like you've had some very unique experiences here in China and dealing with the different cultural differences. Well, Cleopatra, maybe you could give us some advice here. So, what advice would you give to someone who is learning Chinese right now?
So I would say my first piece of advice is speak and speak often. Listen and listen often. By speak and speak often, I mean, it doesn't matter what city you're in. Most likely there are Chinese international students there. There are Chinese speaking people there. Volunteer if you have to. Go out to Chinatown if you have to, but always make sure you're speaking with people in Chinese and using the language because language is like a muscle. If you don't use it, it becomes very weak and then eventually it goes. And so you have to continue to flex that muscle and build it up. So that's like the first approach. Listening and listening often, making sure that you're watching all your great Chinese dramas. If your Chinese isn't good enough yet, then I would suggest listening to like Thomas the Train or Postman Pat in Chinese. So they have like the dub versions in Chinese for like little Chinese kids. And those are really good because they're simple language and usually children's TV shows for that age group are very one situational focused. So it's easy to understand the storyline. And because the storyline is very Western And if you're Western, then you'll get the storyline quite quickly. And so building up to like watching Chinese drama with the English subtitles, covering it up and peeking and, trying to improve your listening skills is another way. And then I would say building your own lexicon. So everyone has words that they use often that are particular to them. Like you don't speak like someone else and someone else doesn't speak like you. And the things that you particularly like to talk about are very different than someone else. So for example, you can achieve fluency in another language without knowing a whole set of words about one topic because you never talk about that. Like I know no medical terms. I wouldn't be able to tell you any medical terms in English. I wouldn't really be able to tell you any medical terms in Chinese. And I don't know a lot of art terms. Like, these are not words that I use very often, right? But you have to figure out those words. For me, I did the old school way because it's all before smartphones. I used to have this little red notebook. And in conversation, when I was talking to someone, if there was a word that I was struggling with, like you're mid-sentence and then this word, you can't find it, you don't know it, and you come across it, I would just write it down really quickly because this is all before you can look up things. And I still think it's a good way, like maybe write it on your cell phone because you can't stop mid-conversation. It's not a good habit to stop mid-conversation and look up things. And then at the end of the day, I would look up all those words and then I would learn those words. And then I did this for months. And the same words kept coming up and up and up. And eventually you'll know your own lexicon. And that's really all you need to actually speak. Like you don't need to know every single word, all the words, but you do need to know your words and start with your words first. And if you have specific things that you love to talk about or learn, then also learn words in that genre. So like, for example, when I was much younger, I loved hip hop. Now I don't know so much. I don't listen to music, but I loved hip hop when I was first learning Chinese and I was totally into like Chinese hip hop. I would buy the magazines and I'd like look up words in the magazines and I'd talk to people about things that I was learning and different music. And like, that was something that was important to me. So it was important for me to know all of these words, right? Similarly, if you love sports, then football is huge. Well, soccer here in the US, then you should learn terminology around that and you'll find a tribe of people who you can talk to about it, right? So really gaining those words for that lexicon.
That sounds like some great advice. I really like that concept of knowing your words. Those things pop up again, and you don't need to know everything per se, but you got to start somewhere, right? And focus in an area, and that's great advice. Well, Cleo or Cleopatra, thanks so much for taking some time here to share your story and your experience with us. And if anyone wants to reach out to you, how could they find you?
You can always find me on LinkedIn. My LinkedIn is Cleopatra Wise, last name Wise. Cleopatra spelled exactly how you would think. So yeah, you can reach out to me on LinkedIn and you can add me or you can follow me.
Well, Cleopatra, thanks so much for taking the time to share the story. I really appreciate it.
No problem. This was great. I had a good conversation.
You have been listening to the You Can Learn Chinese podcast. My name is Jared Turner, co-founder of the Mandarin Companion Graded Reader Series. My co-host is John Pazin, co-founder of Mandarin Companion, founder of All Set Learning, the Chinese Grammar Wiki, and Sinosplice.com. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe and take a moment to text or message this episode to a friend or share it on social media. It really helps us to reach more people on their language journey. You can leave us a review on iTunes or reach out to us at mandarincompanion.com or find us on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter. You can find our Chinese Graded Reader Series on Amazon, iBooks, Google Play, or wherever you get your books. Apologies to John Cena, we just ran out of time. The You Can Learn Chinese podcast is produced by myself, Jared Turner, and our editor is Jasper Chua. A thanks to our special guest, Cleopatra Wise, and of course, thanks to my co-host, the man, the myth, the legend, John Pazin. See you next time.